Hello again, everyone. Dan McTeague, President, Canadians for Affordable Energy. A lot of topics to cover. Looks like while Parliament is frozen, the Liberals have prorogued and shut down our democracy. We still need to talk about the many elephants in the room now, and they seem to be coming at us fast and furious. But I'll tackle one today that has resurfaced after about 5 or 6 years of very little discussion, but has now come and become more topical as Canadians now realize maybe blocking pipelines wasn't such a smart idea. And even though they voted for it in 2019 and they again voted for it in 2021, it now appears that Donald Trump, we may not like him, but he's actually pointed out the fact that Canada has refused to find other alternatives to get its energy to markets that came knocking on our door, cap in hand, asking for oil and natural gas. I'll get to natural gas and of course LNG and other comments. But I want to talk about Energy East, the pipeline that would have gone from what is an existing pipeline all the way to Ottawa, extended through Quebec, and then ultimately into New Brunswick, where it could be exported to our partners, certainly in the Atlantic Basin. But with the Panama Canal, we could actually bring it pretty much anywhere in the world. The idea, of course, isn't new. It isn't novel. I believe Irving, the largest refinery on the East Coast, largest refinery in the U.S. East Coast as well, did bring in Canadian oil from the Trans Mountain Pipeline 2-3 years ago, brought it all the way around the Panama Canal up through the Atlantic and delivered Canadian oil to an Eastern Canadian refinery, which goes to prove the point. Imagine if we had 1 million barrels. And let's put this in context. If we hadn't gone and killed this pipeline because of a handful of activists and frankly social miscreants who've got nothing better to do and believe that CO2 is the guiding principle that changes weather, we might have been able to put about 20,000 people back to work in New Brunswick. At a time in which it was canceled, I thought it was interesting that 25,000 people in the province of New Brunswick lined up for a food bank near Christmas in 2018, 2019, and no one seemed to make the connection. Well, they do make the connection today, Canadians, because you know full well that as Donald Trump is saying no more to Canadian imports and seems to be willing to engage the country in a war, that has us all wearing the flag. Suddenly we've rediscovered the importance of pipelines. I won't talk about our personal philosophical hypocrisy, but that we're awakening to the idea that somehow pipelines are important suggests that we should go one step further, and that's to eliminate talk by any politician, whether it be Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Jagmeet Singh, or whoever, about net zero and the fantasies and the destruction that it has wreaking on most economies, most particularly Canada, where we've seen the GDP per capita drop, where we've seen deficits go through the roof, and where we now see a tariff war that could very well spell an intractable hit to our standard of living. Because, of course, we have incompetent governments that have said no and followed on to the narrative, very dangerous, rampant ideology that says, there's only one molecule out there that's dangerous. They actually call CO2 a pollutant. But I'll leave that for real scientists who know that that is absolutely false garbage and is an absolute lie. And if you hear any scientist, much less a politician, aping scientist saying it's a pollutant, you know full well that they're deceiving you and trying to bamboozle you with their narrative that has damaged the country and increased the inability for Canadians to make ends meet, damaged affordability, as I've been saying now since 2016, 2017. The Energy East pipeline with 1 million barrels a day would put and inject an extra $7 to $10 billion in the Canadian economy. And that's nothing small, assuming, of course, it sells at about $70 a barrel. It also means that our allies would, who've come to us, the 12 of them that have come to us to talk about energy, would have a reliable alternative, to the energy sources that they currently get, whether that's from the Middle East or that's from dangerous countries like Russia, Iran, or even Venezuela. There is a concern that Canada has missed the boat, and I'll talk about that with respects to of course, LNG. But on the oil issue alone, it wasn't just the Northern Gateway pipeline in the west, the Energy East pipeline in the east. It's the fact that you and I had to pay $34 billion to build the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion because one province and climate fanatics decided that they were going to use every tool in the toolbox to block a pipeline that had already been permitted. You have a federal government that gave permission to Kinder Morgan to build that pipeline, and we put obstacles in their way, even though they had the legitimate legal right. We sat back and allowed miscreants to go out and to create a situation where they delayed and found every possible avenue to prevent that pipeline from being built. So, congratulations, Canada. You voted NDP and Liberal. You voted for parties that basically shut down the building of a pipeline and sent a message to the rest of the world that Canada is a very shady and very checkered country in which to make any type of investments. Because even when your own government says, or the government of that country, that is Canada, says you have a permit to do something, we're not going to stand by it. Look, Canada needs a set of principles and laws and predictability. So when it gives its imperature, when it gives its stamp of approval on a project, that's our gold standard. That's our bond. The fact that we have violated, that we've thrown it away, that we've denigrated in favor of some ridiculous narratives being pushed by people who, frankly, should be charities that come under closer scrutiny from the CRA, among other things, is unbelievable. The fact that the Canadian government has permitted a massive deficit because we have nothing to attract that is worthy of investing in this country, $62 billion deficit, should be a signal to all Canadians that while you have rising debts, more people going to food banks, people can't afford housing, a generation of younger people who have been sold this woke ideology that Canada's identity is something that we should diminish, that we have a prime minister that says there is no identity. Regardless of what is being proposed today as a band-aid solution, the reality is that Canada must and should be building those pipelines, and it shouldn't take Donald Trump, the orange man, to tell us exactly what is in the best interest of this country. Let's stand up for Canada by standing up by selling our resources to the rest of the world. If we don't do that, there's going to be a tough time ahead for every Canadian who doubts that. I'm Dan McTeague. I'll talk to you shortly.